Thousands of people walk into America's parks and forests. Most of them come back sunburned, tired, and full of pictures they will never look at again. Some of them do not come back. The official reports say exposure, equipment failure, poor decisions made by inexperienced hikers who overestimated their abilities and underestimated the land. Those reports are not wrong, but they are not complete. The people telling tonight's stories worked the trails, the fire roads, and the visitor centers. They wore the uniform. They carried the radio. They followed the procedures. And each of them, at some point, encountered something the procedures were never designed to address. Stay close. Story 1: The Volunteer Trail. I was not a park ranger when it started. I want to be clear about that because the title matters when you are trying to get people to believe you. I was a seasonal volunteer, trail maintenance. That is the bottom of the ladder. You do not carry a badge. You do not get a radio unless they have extras. You carry loppers, a handsaw, and a paper map with highlighted sections showing which trails need clearing that week. They give you an orange vest and a hat with the park logo, and they tell you to be back at the trailhead lot by 4. The park was Broken Bow Lake area in southeast Oklahoma, not a national park. State land, some Army Corps land around the lake, and a patchwork of county roads connecting it all. Beautiful country. Thick pine forest, sandstone bluffs, creeks that run copper-colored after rain. The kind of place people from Dallas and Tulsa drive 3 hours to reach so they can rent a cabin and pretend they live differently. I signed up because I had just finished a bad stretch, lost a teaching job. My girlfriend moved to Portland without inviting me. I was 31 and sleeping in my mother's guest room in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I needed something that would put me in the woods all day so I could stop looking at my phone. The first 6 weeks were fine, better than fine. I cleared deadfall. I remarked blazes. I ate lunch, sitting on rocks above the lake. I talked to hikers maybe 3 times a day, mostly giving directions or telling them how far it was to the next overlook. I started sleeping well for the first time in a year. The problem started on a Thursday in late September. I was assigned to clear a section of the Skyline Trail, which runs along a ridge about 4 miles from the nearest road. It is a moderate trail, but it narrows in spots and the signage is inconsistent. People miss turns. They end up on game trails that fade into nothing. It happens several times a season. I had finished my section by noon. I was eating a sandwich on a downed pine when I heard someone calling from below the ridge. Not screaming, just calling. A woman's voice, steady and clear, saying the word hello at regular intervals, every 15 seconds or so, like a metronome. Hello. Pause. Hello. Pause. I stood up and walked to the edge where the ridge drops off into a drainage thick with undergrowth. I could not see anyone. The forest below was dense. I called back. Hey, are you lost? I'm up on the ridge trail. The calling stopped. I waited. Nothing. I called out again. I told her I was a trail volunteer and asked if she needed help finding her way back. Silence, not even birds. The kind of silence that makes you aware you have been hearing a background hum of insects and wind your entire life, and it has just been switched off. Then, from below, her voice again. But this time it was not saying hello. It said my name, not my last name. My first name, Caleb. I had not told anyone on the trail my name that day. I had not seen another person since leaving the trailhead at 7 that morning. My name was not on my vest. It was on a lanyard badge clipped inside my jacket pocket face down. I did not respond. I just stood there with my sandwich in one hand and my loppers in the other, staring down into a wall of green and brown that gave me nothing. Then the voice said, "Caleb, I can't get back up." And that is the moment where a normal person makes one of two choices. So you either go down into the drainage and help someone who might actually be injured, or you mark the location, hike out, and report it so someone with proper equipment can respond. I chose the responsible option. I dropped a pin on my phone's GPS, marked a blaze on the nearest tree, and hiked back to the trailhead. I reported it to the volunteer coordinator, a woman named Denise, who had been running trail operations for 11 years. I told her exactly what happened. A woman calling for help, the approximate location, the GPS pin, and then I told her the voice used my name. Denise did not react the way I expected. She did not look concerned. She did not look confused. She looked tired, like I had just added something to a list she was already carrying. She asked me to point to the location on the wall map in the office. I did. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "We'll send someone out tomorrow. Don't go back to that section." I asked her if she was going to send someone today. She said no. I asked her why. She said the drainage was too steep for a solo recovery, and the proper team was not available until morning. It sounded reasonable. It was reasonable. But the way she said it was not reasonable. It was final in a way that did not match the urgency of a person possibly injured at the bottom of a ravine. I went home. I did not sleep well. The next morning I checked the volunteer board for the assignment update. Denise had reassigned me to a lakeside picnic area 4 miles from Skyline Trail. My new job was inspecting fire rings and checking trash cans. I asked about the drainage. She said a team had checked it at first light. No sign of anyone, no tracks, no disturbance, no gear, nothing. I let it go. 3 days later, I was eating lunch at the same picnic area when 2 day hikers came in from a connector trail looking rattled. They were a couple in their 40s, good gear, experienced. The man asked me if there was anyone else on the Skyline Ridge section that morning. I said I did not think so. He said they had heard a woman calling from below the ridge, saying hello, over and over at regular intervals. His wife added, and then she used my name. I felt something move through me that was not quite fear. It was recognition, like hearing a sound you have been dreaming about and realizing it exists outside your head. I asked them to describe the voice. They said it was calm, clear, almost pleasant, not panicked. The woman said it sounded like someone practicing a word, not someone asking for help. I reported it to Denise. She thanked me and wrote it down. I watched her write it in a logbook I had never seen before. Not the official incident log, a different one, smaller, older, with entries going back years. I did not get to read it. She closed it and put it in a drawer. 2 weeks later, the volunteer season ended. I went back to Broken Arrow. I got a substitute teaching job. I stopped thinking about it mostly except at night, when I was lying in the dark and the room was too quiet. Here is the part that has stayed with me. In November, I was on the Oklahoma Trail Volunteers Facebook group. Someone had posted a news article about a hiker who went missing near Broken Bow Lake in mid-October. A solo female hiker, age 29. Her car was found at the Skyline Trailhead. Her pack was found near the ridge. They never found her. I read the article 3 times. I looked at her photo. I had never seen her before in my life. But I pulled up my phone and looked at the GPS pin I had dropped in September. And I looked at the map in the article, showing where her pack was recovered. They were 200 yards apart. I thought about calling someone. The volunteer office, the county sheriff, someone. But what would I say? I heard a voice a month before she disappeared. A voice that knew my name. A voice that came from the exact drainage where her trail ended. I would sound like a person trying to insert himself into a tragedy. I would sound unstable. I would sound like the kind of man who loses a job and a girlfriend and retreats to the woods and starts hearing things. So I said nothing. But I think about that drainage every day, and I think about the logbook Denise closed before I could read it. And I think about how quickly she moved me away from that ridge. She knew. And the protocol was not rescue. The protocol was distance. I do not know what is in that drainage. I do not know what uses a person's name like a tool, but I know it is patient. And I know that when the next volunteer hears it, the procedure will be the same. Reassign, redirect, do not go back. And somewhere in the drawer, the book gets one line longer. Story 2. Boundary Marker, 216. My second summer as a backcountry ranger in the North Cascades, I was assigned a solo patrol rotation covering a section of trail corridor between Ross Lake and the Canadian border. The area is steep, wet, and heavily forested. Most of the visitors are experienced backpackers doing the multi-day routes, but every year a few come underprepared. Part of the job is checking permits at backcountry campsites. Part of it is making sure people are not building fires during burn bans. And part of it, the part they do not put in the job listing, is walking the boundary markers along the border to make sure they are intact. There are hundreds of these markers in the North Cascades sector, small concrete or bronze obelisks set into the ground at intervals along the U.S.-Canada border. Most of them are in places no one visits. No trail, no view, just thick second-growth forest, or slide alder or talus fields where the border is a line on a map that the land itself does not acknowledge. I was told to check markers 210 through 225 during a 5-day loop. Walk to each one, photograph it, note its condition. Log any damage or displacement, that was it. It was tedious work. The markers are often buried under brush. Some of them sit on slopes so steep you have to use both hands to reach them. But the weather was good and I was 24 and I liked being alone in the backcountry. The first 3 days were uneventful. I found markers 210 through 215 without difficulty. Some were leaning. One had frost heave damage. I photographed everything and noted the GPS coordinates. On the morning of day 4, I hiked cross-country toward marker 216. My map showed it sitting at the head of a narrow draw about 2 miles off the nearest maintained trail. The terrain was moderate for the first mile, then dropped into a dense corridor of old spruce where the canopy closed overhead and the light went gray. I found the marker at just past noon. It was intact, upright, clean. In fact, it was unusually clean. The other markers had been covered in moss, lichen, dirt, spider webs, things that accumulate on objects that sit undisturbed in the forest for decades. Marker 216 looked like someone had wiped it down that morning. I photographed it, I noted the condition, and then I noticed the ground around it. There was a circle of bare soil, roughly 6 feet in diameter, surrounding the marker. No pine needles, no fallen branches, no undergrowth. Just flat, dark earth, neatly maintained, like someone had swept it. Beyond the circle, the forest floor was normal. Thick duff, rotting logs, sword ferns. the usual clutter of an old forest. But inside the circle, the ground was bare and smooth. I told myself it was a game trail junction. Animals gather at certain points, deer bed down, elk scrape. There are explanations for bare ground in a forest. I wrote possible wildlife clearing in my notes and moved on. That night I camped about a mile south on a flat bench above a creek. Normal camp. I cooked dinner. I hung my food bag. I was in my tent by 8. At some point during the night I woke up, not with a start. Slowly, the way you surface from deep sleep when something in the environment has changed, but your brain has not yet identified what it is. I lay still and listened. Creek noise. Wind in the canopy. Nothing unusual, but something had changed. It took me a full minute to identify it. The air smelled different. Not bad. Not like decay or smoke or animal musk. It smelled clean, aggressively clean. Like wet concrete. Like the inside of a new building before anyone has moved in. I unzipped my tent and looked out with my headlamp. Nothing. Trees, darkness. The creek below. The smell faded after a few minutes. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I broke camp and continued to marker 217. I never reached it. 2 hours into the hike, I realized I was back at marker 216. I had been walking south. Marker 217 was south-southwest by my compass bearing. I had followed the bearing correctly. My GPS showed I had traveled the right distance. But I was standing in front of marker 216 again, looking at the same swept circle of bare earth. I checked my compass. I checked my GPS. I reoriented using the sun and the terrain. I picked a new bearing and walked. 40 minutes later, I was back at marker 216. The circle of bare earth was slightly larger than the day before, maybe 8 feet in diameter now. The marker itself was still clean, still upright. I had the irrational thought that it was watching me, which I pushed away immediately because concrete does not watch. I decided to backtrack north. Forget 217 through 225. I would return the way I came, report a navigation issue, and let them send someone with better equipment. I hiked north for 3 hours. Good pace, clear bearing, familiar terrain. And then the trees opened into a small draw, and I was looking at marker 216 again. The circle was now roughly 12 feet across. I sat down on a log outside the circle, and I ate a granola bar, and I tried to think clearly. I was not panicking. I was confused. Confusion felt more manageable than fear, so I held on to it. I pulled out my radio and called dispatch. I gave my position. I said I was having navigation difficulty and requested a bearing check to the nearest trail junction. Dispatch came back with coordinates. I plotted them on my map. The route was clear. West-northwest, 3 miles to the maintained trail. I followed the bearing exactly. I counted my paces. I checked my compass every 200 steps. 1 hour and 40 minutes later, I stepped into the clearing around marker 216. The circle of bare earth now extended to the tree line, 20 feet across at least. And in the center, the marker was no longer alone. There was a second object next to it, small, dark, sitting on the bare ground about a foot from the marker's base. I did not approach it. I stood at the edge of the clearing and used my binoculars. It was a hiking boot, a single boot, men's, maybe size 10, worn, caked with dried mud along the sole. The laces were untied and splayed out flat on the ground, arranged neatly. Not tossed, placed. It had not been there that morning. It had not been there any of the 3 previous times I had arrived at this marker. Someone, or something, had set it there while I was walking in circles. I keyed my radio and told dispatch I had found personal property at a boundary marker and requested immediate guidance. Dispatch asked me to describe the item. I did. There was a pause. Then a voice I did not recognize came on the radio. Not dispatch. Someone older, male. Calm in a way that sounded practiced. He said, "Ranger, do not approach the marker. Do not touch the item. Walk due west and do not stop until you reach water. Follow the water downhill. Do not return to this area. Confirm." I confirmed. I asked who I was speaking with. He said, "Walk now, please." I walked west. I hit a creek within 30 minutes. I followed it downstream. 2 hours later, I reached a fire road. An hour after that, I was picked up by a patrol vehicle. Nobody asked me about the boot. Nobody asked me about the navigation problems. In the debrief, they asked about markers 210 through 215, and I gave my reports. When I mentioned 216, the debrief officer said that marker had been reassigned to a different rotation and was no longer part of my survey. A week later, I looked up missing persons reports for the North Cascades sector. There were 4 open cases in the last 6 years. 2 of them were last seen on trails within 10 miles of the border. I searched for anything about marker 216 specifically. I found nothing official. But I found a single post on a backcountry forum from 3 years earlier. A day hiker describing a concrete border marker surrounded by a circle of bare-swept earth. He said it felt wrong. He said the air smelled like wet concrete. He said he turned around and left. 22 people had viewed the post. Nobody had replied. I finished my season. I did not reapply. I work for the Forest Service now in a completely different state, doing timber surveys. Office work mostly. I drive to the field sites, take my measurements, and drive back. I have not been in the backcountry overnight since. Sometimes in the fall, when the air is damp and still, I catch a smell. Clean, mineral, like fresh concrete. It never lasts long, but it arrives without a source. And every time, I am already checking the ground beneath my feet before I understand why. Story 3. Fire season. People think of park rangers as the ones in the flat hats standing at the entrance booth, telling you to have a great visit. Some of us are that. I was not. I was a wildland fire monitor for the Bureau of Land Management, stationed in a district office in Central Oregon, assigned during fire season to a vehicle patrol route covering about 300 square miles of high desert, juniper steppe, and ponderosa forest east of Bend. My job during active fire season was to drive the route, watch for smoke, report weather conditions from fixed stations, and maintain communication with the district fire management officer. I was one of 4 monitors covering different quadrants. We overlapped at the district office for shift changes and briefings, but during the 12-hour shifts, we were alone. Just a truck, a radio, a pair of binoculars, and a route card telling you which roads to drive and which stations to visit. I liked the work. I grew up in Burns, Oregon. I understand empty country. It does not make me nervous. I know what wind sounds like through rimrock, and I know how sage smells after rain. And I know that the silence out there is not really silence. It is just a different set of sounds that city people have not learned to hear yet. I was in my 3rd season when the fire started, mid-August. The district was at preparedness level 4, which meant everything was dry and anything could ignite. I was on my afternoon rotation, driving a BLM road that ran along the base of a low ridge about 40 miles from the nearest town. Standard patrol, hot, dry, wind out of the southwest at maybe 15 miles per hour. At around 3 in the afternoon, I saw smoke. Not a column, a smudge. Low and gray coming from the far side of the ridge. I radioed it in, gave the bearing an approximate distance, and continued to the nearest high point for a better visual. From the overlook, I could see it clearly. A small surface fire moving through dry grass on the east slope. Maybe 2 acres. Nothing unusual for August. I reported the size, fuel type, and wind direction. Dispatch acknowledged and said an engine crew was being routed ETA 90 minutes. I was told to continue monitoring from my position and report any change in behavior. For the next 40 minutes, the fire did what small grass fires do. It moved with the wind. It crept downhill where the fuel was thinner. It put up steady light smoke. I reported every 10 minutes, then it stopped. I do not mean it burned out. I do not mean it encountered a fuel break or a change in wind. I mean it stopped. The fire was burning in a continuous line through grass and sage, moving east. And it stopped moving. The flames were still visible. The smoke was still rising, but the fire edge did not advance. I reported it. Dispatch asked me to confirm. I confirmed. I said the fire appeared to be holding position without suppression. Dispatch said that was unusual, but not impossible, and to continue monitoring. I watched for another 20 minutes. The fire burned in place. It did not grow. It did not shrink. It held a perimeter like it had been told to stay. Then it moved. But not the way fire moves. Fire follows fuel and wind. This fire turned. It turned north against the wind and began moving along the base of the ridge in a straight line, not spreading, traveling, like something walking with a lit match. I'd been around wildfire for 3 seasons. I'd seen fires crown, spot, run, and lie down. I'd never seen a fire travel in a straight line perpendicular to the wind. I reported it. My voice was steady. I used proper terminology. I said the fire appeared to be exhibiting anomalous spread behavior and was moving north along the ridge base against prevailing wind. Dispatch asked me to repeat. I repeated. There was a silence on the radio that lasted about 10 seconds. Then dispatch came back and said, Unit 7, relocate to Station 14 and hold for further instruction. Station 14 was 12 miles south. Away from the fire, I asked if they wanted me to continue visual monitoring until the engine crew arrived. Dispatch said no. Relocate now. I relocated. I drove to Station 14 and parked and sat there with the engine running and the radio on. The engine crew arrived at the fire site an hour later. I listened to their traffic. They reported a 2-acre fire with normal spread. They contained it in 40 minutes, nothing unusual in their reports. Nothing about direction changes, nothing about anomalous behavior. I filed my report at the end of shift. I described what I had seen. My supervisor, a man named Haskell who had been with BLM for 20 years, read it while I sat across from his desk. He did not interrupt. When he finished, he set the paper down and looked at me. You see where it went? He asked. North, I said, along the ridge. You see where it stopped? I had not thought about that. I had been told to relocate before the fire stopped its lateral movement. But I had watched it through binoculars while I drove. And the last thing I had seen before the ridge blocked my view was the fire reaching a specific point on the slope and holding there. There's a draw, I said. It looked like it stopped at the mouth of a draw. Haskell nodded. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a topographic map that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases were white. He spread it on the desk. There were marks on it. Small red X's, maybe 30 of them, scattered across the district in no pattern I could identify. He pointed to the ridge where I had watched the fire. There were 2 red X's near it, one at the base, one at the mouth of a draw on the north slope. That draw has burned 6 times in 20 years, Haskell said. 6 fires, all different ignition sources, lightning, campfire, roadside, equipment. One was arson. Every single one, regardless of where it started, regardless of wind, regardless of fuel conditions, reached that draw. I looked at the map. The other red X's were scattered across the district, draws, ravines, box canyons, saddles between ridges. Those 2? I asked. Those 2. I asked what was in those locations. He said nothing. We've checked. No structures, no mines, no historical sites. Some of them don't even have good fuel. One of them is a basalt flat where there's barely enough vegetation to carry a flame, but fire finds it anyway. He folded the map and put it back in the drawer. You're going to ask me what it means, he said. I don't know. I've been mapping it for 16 years. The fires go where they want to go, not where fuel and wind tell them to go, and they have preferred destinations. I asked if he had reported it. He said he had written it up 3 times. Twice to the district office, once to the state fire management officer. The first 2 reports were filed without response. The third was returned with a note that said fire behavior in complex terrain often appears anomalous to ground-level observers and that aerial monitoring was a more reliable assessment tool. He was not angry about it. He was not bitter. He told me this the way you tell someone the weather. It is what it is. The fire goes where the fire goes. I finished that season. I came back the next year, and the year after. I have now been doing this for 6 seasons, and I have seen it 4 more times. Fires that turn. Fires that follow paths that do not correspond to any model. Fires that stop at specific locations and burn there with an intensity that does not match the fuel. Last September, I watched a fire reach one of Haskell's red X's, a shallow depression between 2 lava flows where the only fuel was bunchgrass and rabbit brush, and burn there for 11 hours. 11 hours in fuel that should have been consumed in 30 minutes. When the crew finally reached it, the ground inside the depression was not charred. It was warm. Like the earth itself had been running a fever, and the fire was the sweat. Haskell retired last spring. Before he left, he gave me the map. Just handed it to me in the parking lot one morning, folded inside a manila envelope. Keep adding to it, he said. Someone should be counting. I asked him what he thought it was. He leaned against his truck and looked out toward the ridge, where I had seen my first anomalous fire 3 years earlier. I think something lives here that we can't see, he said. And I think fire is the only thing it can use to move, or to eat, or to signal. I don't know which, maybe all 3. He drove away. I have not heard from him since. I still drive the route. I still report what I see. I use the proper terminology. I file my observations, and I know they will be received with the same polite disinterest that met Haskell's reports. But I carry the map. And when a new fire starts, before I look at the wind, before I check the fuel model, before I calculate rate of spread, I look at the red X's, and I draw a line from the ignition point to the nearest mark. The fire always confirms it. I am not telling you something lives in the ground in Central Oregon. I am telling you that fire does not behave like a force of nature out here. It behaves like an errand. 3 people, 3 parks, 3 sets of rules that did not cover what they actually encountered out there. The procedures worked fine. The radios worked fine. The maps were accurate and the gear was good and the training was solid. None of that mattered because the thing they each found was not in the manual. If you have worked in a place that does not behave the way it should, Crypt Whisper wants to hear from you. The comments are open, the inbox is open. Until next time, watch the trail, mind the markers, and if a fire turns against the wind, do not follow it.